Okay, so we left off talking about the chore and the chorus, and now we are going to talk about Greek architecture. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of the overview of how you distinguish the different types of Greek architecture. I want you to understand this is not in chronological developments, it's more based on geographical. So you have Ionic, which is basically off the Greece and Turkey coast, and you have Doric, which is mainland Greece. Doric is the masculine, and Ionic is the feminine, and when we look at the Parthenon, it's a combination of both. So this is just an example of a traditional Greek plan. So this is like the blueprints, pretty much, for a temple. Key vocabulary would be naos, which is the primary purpose to cult statue in the central sanctuary, so the cult statue would go in this area. The colonnades that surround the side passages, and the peristyle is the full surrounding of columns. So you can see this up here. And the steps on the exterior platform are called the stereobate, or the outer stairs, and the stylobate would be the inner columns where they rest upon, and these circles would note the amount of columns. And like we talked about at the Carnegie, mathematically they would get their amount of columns and then double it and add one on each side. So here's what the Doric order looks like. Doric elevation, you have major categories, and it's broken down here into categories. The entablature is everything is on top of the columns. So this entire space here is called the entablature. The architrave is the beam that supports everything onto the column. The frieze, which would go up here, and in the Doric order, we break this down into triglyphs and metopes. And like I said, it breaks down depending on the order. So the Doric is broken down into specific categories. And the sculpture panels would go into the metopes, and this would just be architectural. This is the Ionic order. And you can tell Doric by, the first thing I look at is the capital of the columns. So you can see here, and this looks more feminine than the Doric. And you have the frieze would run up here. And once again, this whole part above the column is called the entablature. This is the architrave that goes below the frieze, the cornice, and then the pediment is the triangular part up here. You have the capital, the shaft, the base, and like I said in the Doric order, the frieze is much different in the Ionic because it's basically a continuous narrative that would go into that frieze. So now we looked at the Archaic period, and we talked about the two basic architecture types. So we have the Doric and the Ionic, and now we're going to move into the classical period, and this is the early classical period, but I just want you to know Archaic, classical, and Hellenistic. So you have this very specific date, 480 BCE, and there's a change in style that happens at this point, and that basically coincides with the Persian departure from Greece. So the Persians are leaving, and you're going to see a very big change in Greek architecture and in Greek sculpture. The change breaks from Egyptian-inspired archaic works towards more naturalism, and you're going to see the contrapposto stance and search for the controlled ideal. So let's start off by talking about the golden ratio. And the golden ratio is basically what pi is. That's like the mathematical term for it. But it also applies in Greek sculpture as well, and in Greek architecture. They believe that everything could be broken down scientifically and mathematically. So we have Polyclitus, he was like our main guy, main artist. So this is his Dorferus, or better known as Spear Bearer. This is from 450 to 440 BCE. This particular image is a copy of the Greek bronze original. And remember, I told you that the majority of Greek sculpture that you're going to look at that's marble is actually a Greek copy. The body should follow the rule of proportion. So it really follows the breakdown of size based on this concept of the golden ratio. The perfect structure would be based on a mathematical sculpture. So this is a very idealized concept. It cuts the body into 4 sections, and it's symmetrical. It's a balance created by imbalance. The ancient Greeks thought the body was perfect, and so all of their sculptures are going to embody what perfect would be. Polyclitus called this his canon. Basically, a canon is a set of ideas that you followed. And we have the concepts of Pythagoras, beauty through ratio. And, the Olympians, that's why the Olympians were nude, because they felt that the body was part of this perfect, ideal man, and it would be internal and external. So if we talk about this concept of contrapposto, we're getting away from the body being so rigid and stiff. And the contrapposto stance is going to make the imagery seem more alive, almost like they're walking. And if you think about the mechanics of walking, it doesn't seem like a complicated process because we do it all the time, but actually it's a really mechanical process and takes a lot of different things happening within the body to walk. So you have this concept of like counterbalance where everything's on kind of like an angle. So the hips are set differently. He's got all the weight bearing on the one foot, and the other foot looks like it's getting ready to lift up and walk forward. And you've got this gentle S curve almost, and you'll really see the S curve in the sculptures of women. The hips are almost hanging, the knees are relaxed, the ankles up, and his head's slightly turned. And the face would have been, this has been broken down mathematically into perfection of symmetry with the eyes and the nose and the mouth. And there's like a specific way you break down a face when you're drawing it, and this is how the sculpture is. So it's almost like you're folding the face in half, and then in half again, and then in half again. This was actually found in Pompeii. The Romans loved Greek sculpture, so they stole a lot of it. So let's talk a little bit about the Athenian Agora. And this is basically like where the birthplace of democracy truly happens. So we're looking at the 5th century BCE, and it's the heart of Athenian democracy. It's the most important public space, and it's at the base of the Acropolis. More people participated in democracy. Basically, anyone who was a great speaker or wealthy could participate in democracy, and there was no type of like voting system. They would just kind of step in and take over. Pericles was reelected to be general something like 15 times. So there was no term limits, but it was very limited on how you could participate. You had to be a male, and you had to be Athenian. And then at one point, one of the rulers, or heads of democracy, basically stated that both of your parents had to be Athenian for you to participate in democracy. There's concepts of ostracism that will come into play where people would actually vote, and they scratched or painted on a piece of pottery and the name of the man that they thought would be most dangerous to the state, and they basically would have to leave Athens. So here's like a viewpoint of, it's in ruins obviously, but you can see how like widespread it is, and you can see up on the hill the Parthenon. There are these concepts of equality before the law, And I think it's interesting because I think we truly heroize the concepts way too much. There would have been a set of administrative buildings, and this is an example of the Stoa, which would have been part of the Greek procession through the Agora to the Parthenon festival of Athena. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we look at the Parthenon. This basically, it would have been like kind of like a modern day courthouse, like where everything that they did democratically would happen here.